Alison Harvey is the set decorator on The Crown. I'm Matt Noble of Gold Derby. And now the show's wrapped, Alison, I wanted to ask you what you missed the most about working on The Crown.
Oh, it's got to be the antiques, I have to say. I mean, having someone else's money, basically to spend on beautiful things and make lovely environments is a real luxury. So yeah, very lucky to have had that experience on The Crown. It was amazing. But I mean, the people were such a great team of people, and just a really, really great project. Great writing, great acting, lovely people. So I mean, the whole package, I think I would say I miss. Yeah, but it was a really special thing to work on.
Mm. As you approach decorating the sets for the show, what was important for you to get right?
Well, I mean, we did a lot. It's not. We have to take. We took great sort of. We tried to honor the subject matter and the fact this is a living family of people. So the research was very important to try and get right, and to respect truth as best we could in a kind of a sort of fictionalized reality, I suppose. But we looked very much to any sources that we could get that were based in reality. I read autobiographies, watched endless documentaries about the royals, trying to get it right and kind of make a believable environment that felt plausible.
Mm. Yeah, like, is there that sort of balance that you have to weigh with a show like this, where you're going, like, is there ever moments where does this look good and does this look accurate, and you got to balance those two things?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the reality of some of the palaces, I mean, they've got amazing architecture, amazing interiors, but the truth of a sort of normal royal environment is sort of grand, but similarly mundane, like all of our houses. They have to live in them. So it's an imagined and sort of slightly beautified version of reality. We make it look a bit more decorated, I suppose. Yeah, a bit more coordinated and enhanced with color and pattern and things like that. Perhaps a bit beyond what the truth of it is. If we looked at the picture of Diana's apartment that her butler took after she died, it was a great kind of insight into the excuse me, into the reality of what that house really looked like. But we still took that as a sort of base point and then beautified it, I suppose, to make it a bit more filmic.
Mm. And was there, for the final season of the show, what was a set that was your favorite to decorate?
Well, weirdly, I know it doesn't really look like a set, but the model of the Queen's funeral was possibly my favorite, because it was so difficult to create, took so long, and had such detailed work and hard to source, and we had to fabricate a lot of those things. And actually, when you saw it, and it was such a sort of poignant moment when the Queen sort of looks at the tiny coffin. So we had to kind of bring in all the crown jewels and sort of 3D scan them, miniaturize them, and print them, and then hand paint everything at sort of miniature scale. So I know it's not sort of a traditional set, but as a sort of piece, it was sort of the smallest, biggest set that we did, I suppose, in a way. And it was really, I suppose, we shot that not long after the Queen had actually died, so it was very sort of emotional, I think, for the crew to sort of see that. And Imelda's performance was so amazing. So that was a really special moment, I think, as well as the sort of the York Minster section at the end with Charles and Camilla getting married, and then the Queen sort of having that moment of reflection with the other sort of previous queens together. I think being there with all those amazing actors at the end of this whole series was, I mean, may not be the most spectacular set, but it was a really sort of poignant moment, I think, for the crew. So
Yeah. And in that series final, you do have Charles and Camilla get married. And I believe you're working on the show too when you had Charles and Diana get married
yes.
on the show. Was there any sort of like like any symmetry or any contrast between set decorating both of those weddings?
I suppose the first Charles and Diana it's hard to sort of do it without the benefit of knowledge. So, we knew at that point that it didn't really end well. So there was a less sweetness about it, I suppose, in what we did there. But essentially it is a big church, in both cases. I think Charles and Camilla was more obviously trying to be more romantic. We had, the orchestra and the choir and the trees and the flowers. It was a far more kind of joyful, environment, because we know that was sort of like the end sort of happy point of that relationship. So there was an element of sort of dissonance, I suppose, between those two sets.
Mm. And what about that? Well, actually, as someone who has worked on the show since the very beginning, what is something that, like, how did it change? How did it evolve? Or what was like that journey like, having worked on the show for all
In terms
seasons?
of sort of sets or
Yeah,
characters?
sets.
Or,
I'd say
um,
sets.
I mean, the Queen's world, Martin, the designer, always felt that the Queen's world should stay almost exactly the same, because she is a constant character that is a sort of still point in this maelstrom of change.
Mm,
So her sets stayed pretty much the same throughout the seasons, partly because we didn't want to confuse, every time you kind of introduce a new actress, he felt that the environment should be familiar, so that the audience knew sort of where they were. So her world sort of stayed pretty constant between the four palaces. So she had the four kind of identities of each palace, the sort of Balmoral, Windsor, Buckingham Palace, and Sandringham, each of which had a kind of slightly different identity. So her sort of world stayed much the same. But then it was great fun for us to travel through the decades in terms of details that you bring in and fabrics, and how that environment really subtly changed in terms of technology. And, we had a whole prop store of telephones, from 1948 to 2005. We had all the mobile phones, all the televisions, all the tech, because that was one of the things that really did change. In the palace, they've got so much sort of antique furniture that nothing really, they're never going to chuck out, their Louis XV table. So the things that did change were tech, quite often. So that's how we sort of tried to kind of update it, that, and weirdly sort of lampshades and fabrics and the clothes. That was really sort of the kind of the key marking points, because the rest, it just doesn't, they sort of live in this kind of weird decorated sort of house that's been the same since 1680 or whatever. And so it's not their taste, it's the taste of history. And then we just sort of have to layer on top a bit. So I just try to concentrate on their desks. I've said this before, but their desks were, Charles said, apparently, no one touches my desk. And if you look at all the pictures of the royals at their desks, they've got the kind of like a sort of hoarded, their little world of kind of the most personal stuff is on that desk. You don't really see it anywhere else, because everyone's sort of tidied it away. But on those desks is all the pictures of their, nearest and dearest, the family, their souvenirs. It's their kind of comfort blanket, I think. So that's sort of where we try to sort of focus the characterization, is in those sort of little, really 6x4 space. And the rest sort of was sort of slightly unchanging.
What do you think the sets tell us about the royal family?
I guess they're just sort of players in history, really. It's just I mean, normally when you're doing a set, you would bring a lot of very personalized elements in, because they, if someone's moved into a house and they're married at 25 or whatever, they will buy everything in that house. But for the royals, it is such an inherited past of an establishment and a tradition that it's quite difficult to personalize them. I mean, Charles was easier because he's more outspoken about the environment and organic culture and architecture and the things that he has been quite sort of outspoken about, but a lot of them are very private, and it's very hard to sort of get any kind of small details of what their kind of behind the scenes life is. So it's we make an imagined informed reality, I suppose, as best we can.
The like final episode, how did you, particularly the final scene, and you've touched on a bit, but like, how did you want to approach that final scene and those final moments of the series?
With the Queen?
Yeah, with the, and from a set perspective, what was important in those moments?
I mean, we had to adapt a really big cathedral in England to try and replicate St. George's Chapel at Windsor. So we had to we had to segment the cathedral halfway down to contain the space. So that was all a sort of trompe l'oeil effect at the back, with sort of everything was built and made, and the carpet was printed, and the altar cloth was painted, and everything, all the gold plates were made and sculpted. So we had to kind of create our own world for that sort of last sequence to make it feel like it was at Windsor. Emotionally, I mean, I think a lot of that comes from the writing and the acting. I mean, Imelda, we just provide a kind of canvas, and we're a sort of supporting background actor, I suppose. We just, hopefully the environment sort of disappears. You shouldn't really, I sort of feel you shouldn't really notice what we do. It just feel real and a correct space for those actors to be in. So I don't know that we necessarily, our job on that, in that occasion, was to kind of really try and replicate the reality of what that location, that place looked like. So it felt like you could cut, and you could cut between the real footage of her the wedding with that our sort of fabricated version, and it did look pretty similar, actually. So that was our job. It was less kind of an emotional design concept as much as just trying to make it feel invisible.
Yeah. You spoke earlier how the Queen passed close to sort of some of the filming of this stuff. What impact do you think the sort of Queen, like what do we think the show is saying about the Queen and the royal family?
I mean, I think anyone who worked on that show, even if they didn't start a royalist, ended up a royalist. I mean, myself included. I became a kind of completely sort of I was sort of indifferent to them when I started the job. But actually, when you sort of look at the lives they lead and the roles they have to perform on a day-to-day basis, I think throughout the crew and the writing and the acting, everyone had a great respect for the job they do, and sort of wanted to honor that and make a show that respected that, I suppose, without being too without kowtowing to it, and being a kind of honorable representation of them. Everyone, I think, sort of, we all had a complete obsession with it, I have to say. Well, maybe it's just me, but my husband subjected to hours and hours of royal documentaries trying to get sort of all the details. So it just became a really fascinating journey, I think, for everyone, because you're living through your own life. So when you live your life, you don't think about what was happening in the world when you were 5, when you were 10, when you were 20. So you kind of go back and sort of re-look at your own history in light of, through the eyes of the royals and the events that went on. So for me, that was a really amazing journey, I think, just to kind of go back and see what was going on in 1975, So for me, that was great. But I don't know about the royal, how the world perceives the royals. I hope with some sort of sympathy, I think, for what they have to do. I think that the whole end of that sequence with the Queen, just really sort of delving into what she sacrificed as a person, her freedoms. It's to do with that sort of control, doing the duty, and what you sacrificed to be part of that family, in spite of all the servants and what looks to be like a luxurious life. It's actually a very sort of stifling existence, I think. So hopefully that was sort of made clear at some point too.
And what do you think's special about the story that this show told?
I think it just weirdly is it's a kind of it's a vehicle for exploring what every family has, which is jealousy, frustration, betrayal. It's a classic, it's a kind of classic sort of Shakespearean or whatever, or soap opera dynamism between people. I think it's just very clever because you think it's going to be perhaps sort of fairly one-dimensional, but it just manages, because all their lives are real and everything they do has sort of frailties, you do end up reflecting kind of every family somehow. So it becomes a really universal story, I think, weirdly, in spite of the fact of their perceived enormous privilege, I suppose.
I think it's really cool how Peter Morgan can sort of take the royal family and use it to comment on family, media, politics,
Yeah,
history, like all these sorts of
yeah.
things. Sort of,
It's really, really, really clever, I think. Yeah.
yeah. Now, Alison, you won an Emmy in 2020 for
I know. But it
your
was,
work on the Aberfan episode of The
yes.
Crown. What did that mean to you, having winning that award?
Oh, well, I mean, amazing. I mean, what bigger privilege is there, or acknowledgement is there? I mean, it was amazing. Weirdly, though, we were in lockdown, so it got announced. I sort of saw it on sort of news feed at 3 a.m. UK time, and I said to my husband, "Oh, seems to we've won an Emmy." He went, "Oh," but it's. I mean, it was a real. We worked really, really hard, and we've got an amazing team, and everyone works really, really hard. So it was amazing to be acknowledged for the work we did on that. So yeah, very grateful.
Did the Emmy find its way to you?
It did, yeah, about a year later.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest honor I'm ever going to have. So yeah, I'm very grateful.
yeah. Where do you keep the Emmy?
It's on my windowsill upstairs. I'm too embarrassed to have it out
Yeah.
downstairs, but yeah,
Uh,
it's hidden in a special place. So
yeah. Oh, that's cool. What made you want to do set decoration and art design stuff for TV or film?
um, I just love history, and I love creating characterization. If you don't want to write a book, it's the nearest you're going to get to kind of writing a story visually.
Mm.
So if you love history and antiques and creating worlds, I suppose it's great sort of imaginative, creative work. Yeah, no, I mean, it's brilliant. It's a great job. I would recommend it.
Was there a moment when you realized it was what you wanted to do?
Um, I mean, I started doing art directing when I did 10 years art directing, but I kept sort of finding myself being pulled into objects. I love objects more than skirting boards. So,
Mm.
it's more to do with what it's like the semiology of objects. Every object has a meaning, which no one really understands, but a pencil or a glass means something about whoever's got it. And I think it's often sort of forgotten how much sort of we pick up in terms of sort of signs of what objects say about a character or a person or a place or a time. So I think that's really interesting, just trying to create a moment in time in a person's life. It's really interesting, I think. I mean, maybe only I think that, but that's my
No, no,
feeling.
definitely. Um, Alison, thank you so much for chatting with us today. All the best of
Thank
luck
you.
for the Emmy Awards this year.
Thank you very
Hopefully,
much.
you'll be nominated and get to go in person to the awards, and you
Well, you
actually,
never know.
yeah, we'll see.
Hope springs eternal. We'll see.
Yeah. But no, no, congratulations for your work on the show. People
Thank you so
who
much.
follow the Emmy Awards and television code, go to goldderby.com to follow the racetrack odds and join the discussion in our forums. And just, Alison, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you much for talking. See you later.